Alright, I know making a second video in a row about Prager University is really redundant, but I just can't help it. They're so full of shit that it's irresistible not to slam them. I really get a kick out of watching their videos. Anyway, we're gonna watch a man named Andrew Roberts suck a 60-year-old man's dick in a video called Churchill, the Man Who Saved the Free World. Now, it should come as no surprise that I absolutely abhor Winston Churchill. I hate him even more than Adolf Hitler, which is really saying something. I might make another video about my opinions on World War II as a whole someday because I have so much to say about it, but we're just gonna have to stick with Winston Churchill. Anyway, I'm just gonna take this head on.
In May 1940, Adolf Hitler and his Nazi war machine.
Okay, we're 6 seconds into the video and there's already something horribly wrong with it. Are the conservatives at PragerU so stupid they can't even get the fucking borders right? They're simply ignoring the fact that Prussia exists and they were occupying the entirety of France and the Benelux region. Do you expect anybody with basic knowledge of geography to take you seriously?
Were sweeping across the European continent. The future of the free world hung in the balance. An isolationist-leaning United States was an ocean away.
So, the United States still existed, but just isolationist. And guess what America is considered? A free nation. So the most economically powerful nation in the world, who was also free, was not threatened at all by the Nazi war machine? That doesn't sound like the ideology of democracy hung in the balance, now does it? If he was talking about democracy in Europe, he would have been correct, but he never specified, so PragerU is once again inherently wrong.
There was one man who stood between Hitler's seemingly invincible army and crushing defeat. That one man was Winston Churchill.
To be frank, it was the English Channel alone that stopped an invasion of Great Britain. If this channel had never existed and Great Britain was somehow connected to France by land, the Blitzkrieg would have taken the English out no problem. Churchill had nothing to do with it.
He first made a name for himself as a war correspondent in the 1890s, covering conflicts in Cuba, northern India, the Sudan, and South Africa. Though he never abandoned journalism and became one of the greatest historians of his age, Churchill used his family connections and his own fame to launch himself into politics. His confident manner and matchless oratory marked him as a natural leader.
This is the part I mentioned earlier about Robert sucking his dick. Alright, just because that he has talents doesn't make him a good person. I could also highlight Hitler's amazing oratory and writing skills and his military genius, at least at the beginning of the war, when he invented the concept of Blitzkrieg and took France in just 6 weeks. If I just leave out the whole, violent racist part, Hitler seemed like an excellent person. Just how they left out the part of how Churchill was also a violent racist himself and supported the use of gas on the citizens of his African and Indian colonies. He was quoted directly saying, "I hate Indians. They are a beastly people with a beastly religion." He was also partly behind the famine in India which happened under his rule, and even mocked the Indians starving to death under his rule. Ultimately, anyone seems like a hero if you put him in the right light.
1914 and World War I found him in the key position of First Lord of the Admiralty, where he did much to modernise Britain's navy. In 1915, Churchill thought he could bring a speedy end.
Once again with the border gore, where the fuck is southern Prussia? Can you guys at least try to make it seem somewhat correct?
To the war by opening a new front in Turkey, which he perceived as the weak link in the German alliance against the Allies. This led to the infamous Gallipoli campaign. Badly underestimating the fighting strength of the Turks, thousands of British, Australian and New Zealand soldiers were killed in battles that proved to be every bit as indecisive and bloody as the campaigns on Europe's Western Front. Churchill took the blame.
Churchill did not fucking take the blame. He first blamed it on his own soldiers, who he once again mocked for fucking dying on the beaches of Gallipoli.
This was perhaps the low point of his life. Dismissed from the war cabinet, 5 months later he enlisted in the army, where he saw action in France.
I've given up on all hope for PragerU. This doesn't even look remotely like the Western Front. Jesus Christ, can you guys try it just a little harder, please?
He rose again in British politics throughout the 1920s, making money, as he always did, through his writing and speaking. As Adolf Hitler took power in Germany in the 1930s, Churchill was one of the first, and certainly the loudest voice in England, sounding the alarm. But it was an alarm few in England wanted to hear.
It's not that they didn't want to hear it, it's just that nobody cared. Britain was not in direct danger from the Reich, and Hitler's territorial ambitions were for Eastern Europe only, and nobody wanted another war after the horrors of World War I, which were still fresh in everybody's mind.
The English had been traumatised, as had all of Europe, by the shocking amount of death and destruction of the First World War. No one wanted to face the possibility that it could happen again. Churchill, however, saw that a new confrontation with Germany was inevitable.
That is a complete and total lie. Winston Churchill wanted a war. He was not in favor of any sort of peacekeeping. He even said, "I will force Germany into a war, whether she wants it or not." The only reason Britons cared about the war was because of his lies that he spread like a plague.
And when the inevitable arrived, with the stunning German attack on France in May 1940, a desperate nation turned to him.
Great Britain had already declared war on Germany before the invasion of France was even planned out, and once again, the only reason the Brits cared about the war was because of his lies.
He was ready. His weapons were his pen, his voice, and his words. "I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat," he told the House of Commons in his first speech as Prime Minister. Things quickly turned from bad to worse. France collapsed, Belgium surrendered, and 250,000 British soldiers barely managed to escape from Dunkirk. Even as the war news moved from dangerous to desperate to disastrous, Churchill never wavered. In speech after speech, he infused the British with the spirit to fight on against Hitler's monstrous tyranny. "We shall not flag or fail," he said after Dunkirk. "We shall go on to the end. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall never surrender."
So just like Hitler, Churchill was able to convince the British that a worthless war he had gotten Britain into was somehow threatening their homeland, although he already knew there was no way Germany could cross the English Channel. So he just kept on lying.
The point about Churchill in 1940 is not that he stopped a German invasion, but that he stopped the British government making peace. If Churchill had not been Prime Minister, the pro-appeasement Foreign Secretary Lord Halifax would have been. We know that Halifax was open to negotiating with Hitler. We'd be mistaken to assume that the German Führer's terms would not have been reasonable. They probably would have been very reasonable, as Hitler wanted to fight a one-front war against Russia.
Yes, because peace is so bad that we should avoid it at all costs, especially if it imposes no harsh terms whatsoever and allows the English people to continue their lives instead of fearing of being bombed every night.
And an agreement with Britain would have allowed him to do just that. Churchill made this impossible.
If the Soviet Union was invaded, communism would have died along with it. Isn't that what conservatives want? They hate communism just like everybody should, so why would they want it to survive? This proves that Churchill wasn't at all interested in saving democracy, but more so wanted to win the war to advance his own interests.
Had he not rallied the British people in the face of defeat after defeat, preventing Hitler from concentrating his full efforts on Russia, the entire history of the free world would have been much different, and undoubtedly much darker. Because of Churchill's efforts and the marvellous resilience of the British people, the United States had an unsinkable aircraft carrier, Britain, from which to mount the liberation of the European continent in June of 1944. For this, and so much more, free people everywhere can thank the greatest man of his age, Winston Churchill.
I waited until the end of that video to address this because I have so much to say about it. First of all, even if Britain had fallen, the United States could not have been defeated by the Axis powers. Second of all, it was impossible for Britain to have fallen in the first place, given the year is 1940, the only thing protecting them was the English Channel, and given the fact that Churchill wasn't a military genius, could have not stopped the Blitzkrieg without the Channel. Now to bring this video to a close, I'm just going to state all the reasons that I hate this vile man. First of all, he was the biggest fucking hypocrite to live. We call him a champion of democracy, because of his actions in World War II, but he also imprisoned all of his political rivals during the war. I don't have anything against the action itself, but you have to admit that what he did was a fascist method. Yet today we still think of him as a hero for freedom. This is partially because of the man himself who once said, quote, "History will smile upon me, for I intend to write it," end quote. And he did write it because every textbook fails to mention that Churchill was just as much of a warmongerer as Hitler was, and only got into the war to advance his imperialist interests and for personal glory. He had no remorse when he requested that the RAF target civilian targets in Germany even before the Blitz, but nobody will ever mention that to you because nobody wants to confront the truth that Churchill was a horrible human being with a lust for power and war, just like Adolf Hitler. This has been The Educated Fascist, and thank you for watching.